Have you ever flipped to a new chapter in a book, realized that it's being narrated from a new point of view character, and just closed the book? I had that experience recently. And what made it worse was this was the third and final book of a trilogy I had enjoyed up to now. I was about to finish the story, and yet I just did not have the spoons to face yet another point of view character. And that's what I want to discuss today. Narrative point of view for a story, why it matters, and how to keep the reader full of spoons, as my Irish friend says. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time World Building with your host, Marie Mullaney. Before we dive into how many characters you need in a story, we have to make sure we're all speaking the same language. So first, let's look at the 5 tools in your POV box or your narrative voice box. Narrative points of view. Narrative points of view are the narrators of a given story, the character through who the story is being told. The first 2 of these narrative points of view are, appropriately, first person, which is split into limited and retrospective. First person is when the narrator uses the I pronoun. For example, I walked into my kitchen and swore as the cool of a puddle of water seeped through my socks. The damn dishwasher had leaked in the night. This kind of narration gives the reader direct access to the thoughts and feelings of the narrator. But unlike third person limited, which does the same, first person also gives the narrator a very clear voice. Because literally everything in the story is filtered through the narrator's vocabulary, experience, and emotions, the narrator's voice becomes a key part of the story. And that narrator's voice is why I feel very, very strongly that it is a mistake to have more than one point of view in the first person voice. I know, it's very popular in romance these days to have both sides of the romance be in first person. But I'll tell you for free, I think this undermines one of the most incredible strengths of first person. First person allows you to delve deep into the voice of the character. It lets the character absolutely shine for the reader. The problem is, when the reader is that deep in the character, to then ask them to switch context and be equally deep in the voice and conscious of another character is jarring. At least it's jarring for me, and I hate it. This is an opinion, you don't have to agree, but I hate it. So, my advice to you is use first person only if you have a strong character voice in your head, and 2, you can tell the whole story from one point of view. Now, I did say we have limited and retrospective in first person, so let me explain what the difference is here. Limited is when the narrator is in the story and the reader experiences the story with the narrator. Examples include the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher and the Kashil series by Jacqueline Carey, although there's some argument to be made that Jacqueline Carey writes a little bit in retrospective. Retrospective is when there is an external narrator telling the story with the benefit of hindsight. This is typical in autobiographies told in the first person. For example, Billy Crystal's autobiography is an external first-person narrator telling the story. Or in fantasy, In Name of the Wind, the storytelling device is that of Quoth telling the story to the chronicler in the first person, so he knows everything that has happened already rather than experiencing it with the reader, and he is giving us the story in retrospect. The device used in Name of the Wind lets us slip pretty easily into first person limited, and that is because it is rare to encounter actual first person retrospective outside of autobiographies for the most part. And speaking of rare points of view, second person is technically a point of view. That is the you pronoun. But outside of adventure books, I haven't seen it used much, and for this reason. It addresses the reader directly. And if the book says to me, you stride into the kitchen and cold water from the leaking dishwasher soaks into your socks, and I then go, but I don't have a dishwasher, then my immersion in the story breaks. It's hard to convince the reader they're acting in the story through the you pronoun. Not impossible, but hard. If you're going to use the second person pronoun, I hope you have a very strong writing device that makes that pronoun make sense. Generally, I'd recommend ignore second person unless you're writing a choose your own adventure style book. Of course, if you are a game master, then the second person POV is made for you, since you're forever telling the players, you creep into the dungeon, and you crawl around the corner, and you spot the orc. Frequently said in many D&D sessions. Okay, and that brings us to third person point of view, which is generally she, he, or they. And like first person, this can be split into two points of view, which is limited and omniscient. Returning to our leaking dishwasher, I recently did in fact have a leaking dishwasher, and you will not believe how much I swore about it and how much it's still stressing me out. Anyway, as Jane walked into the kitchen, cold water from the leaking dishwasher soaked into her socks, and she swore. That's third person. Third person limited is when you are restricted to the emotions, thoughts, and feelings of a single point of view character from whose perspective the scene is narrated. This is great for telling multiple point of view stories, as shown in A Song of Ice and Fire, the Powder Mage trilogy, the Bloodsworn saga, and so many other fantasy sagas, including my own. Unlike first person, it does allow for fairly seamless context switching between characters, because while it can go as deep into the emotions of the point of view character, you don't have the same amount of character voice in third person limited. A snarky character's whole scene isn't written snarky, for example. Third person omniscient, on the other hand, is still he, she, and they, but gives you access to all the emotions, thoughts, and feelings of all the characters. This is the narrative voice employed by Tolkien in Lord of the Rings and by Adrian Tchaikovsky in most of his books. With omniscient, you can describe the world without restraint because the narrator knows everything, whereas with limited, you can only describe what a given character knows. However, typically omniscient stories are somewhat more removed from the immediacy of third person limited, and they tend to be at a slower pace than third person limited, exactly because so much more is explored in omniscient. It's a much less popular narrative voice than it once was, but Adrian Tchaikovsky proves that it's far from dead. Okay, so that's the basics of narrative voice, and most people stop there when explaining what narrative voice is and which you should use and so on. But this channel is not most people. So we are going to go deeper. But before we do that, give me one moment to tell you about Worldbuilding Blueprints. This is the book that I wrote that will take you from zero to hero in world building, including designing your story and choosing your characters. And it's not just theory. Inside this book, you will find exercises and worksheets like this one for designing the emotional arc of your characters, including your villains. This book is available as a PDF, an ebook, and an audiobook on my website right now, and will be available as a physical book in March-ish of 2026, after the Kickstarter fulfills. We had a paperback snafu, so there's been a slight delay in fulfillment. There is the glorious hardback in full color, like this one, and there is also the paperback, which is in black and white, and is obviously somewhat cheaper and somewhat lighter, so it ships for less as well. But it has all of the same exercises and content. And I will give you a discount. The first 100 people to use the code POV 2026 when buying the PDF on my website will get 20% off their purchase. Alrighty. Let's talk about using multiple POVs, why it works when it works, and when it gets, in my opinion, way too much. Main character point of view. First, let's talk about why you would want multiple point of view characters at all. They offer a few advantages. One, they allow you to explore different points of view about an event, a piece of world building, or anything else. In my own world, for example, I have very different perspectives on religion, and having multiple points of view characters allows me to explore those different viewpoints. Multiple perspective also allows you to have the story play out in different parts of your world. For example, in my books, I have Naira, who travels from the continent of Kisangi to the empire of Lumiaron, where the main action takes place. And thirdly, multiple point of view characters allows you to tell the story from different social strata of your society and to explore your themes from those different points of view, making your exploration of those themes so much richer by having the different status people explore the themes. So all three of these reasons play into what I call main character point of view. This is when your point of view character is an often returning narrative character who drives the story forward as a protagonist. For me, such a character should always have an emotional growth arc and should be a protagonist in the story. For this reason, I would say that you should restrict these main character point of view to between 3 and 5 in number. And the reason for that restriction is simply how much energy the reader has. Remember, each main character is a character you're asking the reader to invest their love into. And each additional main character is a character that you're taking time away from the love the reader has for the other main characters. So, in my opinion, with regards main characters, less is definitely more, so that the reader can lavish love on those main characters that are there in the book. And that's one of the things that drove me crazy about the final book of Arc of a Scythe, The Toll by Neil Shusterman. There were like 1 million POVs. Not literally, obviously, but close. There's random scythes, random toners, some Nimbus agents, a whole heaps of people that really didn't need their own voice in the story. And the worst part is some of the scenes are told through this random freaking POV when the main character POV is right there in the damn scene? My God! What? Why would you rob me of Faraday's point of view by telling the story from the perspective of some Nimbus agent that I've barely met and don't give a crap about? And that brings me to a device that some authors use that drive me a little crazy, and I wish they'd stop. And that is side character POVs. And under side character POVs, we have one and done characters, we have flat POVs who have no growth arcs and who are just there to push some plot elements, and we have cheerleading POVs that are there to show us how the world feels about a main character. Now, despite the fact that I hate this device, there is some justification for these types of point of view characters. And honestly, I've used one or two of them on occasion. So, let's talk about side character, POV. We'll break this down into those three types of characters that I mentioned in my rant. And we'll speak about when they can work and what their pitfalls are. And we'll start with a one and done POV. These are characters who get a single scene or chapter from their perspective, and then they disappear from the narrative. Authors often use them to showcase a unique perspective on a major event or to reveal information that the main characters wouldn't know. Sometimes they're also used to add tension or mystery by introducing a character whose fate is unknown or whose actions can have ripple effects. And lastly, they're sometimes used to expand the world by giving a glimpse into a part of the story or society that the main characters don't interact with. For example, in A Song of Ice and Fire, George R.R. Martin occasionally uses one-off POVs for minor characters to highlight the chaos and scale of the world. Honestly, I use them in my prologues and epilogues in Sangwheel Chronicles, and they always die. Well, mostly they die. But they're there to just kind of show some of the villain actions outside of the main narrative. And that's a key, because these kinds of one and done POVs can be great as a disposable character if they're not overused and they're limited to outside of the main narrative. In the main narrative, if the scene is critical to the plot or theme and cannot effectively be told through a main character's POV, a one and done might work. But ask yourself, could this information be conveyed through a dialogue, a letter, or a main character witnessing the event? If it could be an email, skip the extra POV. Remember, every one and done needs to be set up properly, their motivations need to be explained, and most importantly, they take the reader away from the characters the reader already loves. Do not do that unless this point of view, this one and done, is really going to add to the story. All right. Next up is the flat POV side character. These are characters who lack emotional depth, growth, or agency. They're often used to deliver exposition about the world, history, or rules without the nuance of a main character's bias. Or sometimes they're used to move the plot forward, providing information or performing actions that the main characters can't or won't. Or they can act as a camera to show events unfolding in a different location. Neil Susterman loves these characters. We are often in the head of someone who's about to be gleaned, and sometimes we're in the head of some random scythe just to show us something happening elsewhere that honestly, again, could have been an email. I genuinely cannot justify a character that has multiple scenes and no growth arc. These flat plot vehicle characters. If you think you need them, you probably don't. You can probably find a way better way to integrate the information they bring into the plot through a main character receiving a letter, having a conversation, or even grieving for a friend that's been killed. Only use this device if you really can't give the information to the reader in any other way. And lastly, we come to my most hated side character POV. Look, I don't like any side character POVs for the most part, but I truly despise cheerleaders. These characters exist solely to show how the world feels about the main characters. They're often used to reinforce the main character's importance by showing how others perceive them. They can also be used to create a sense of scale by demonstrating the main character's influence on the world. Ooh, you're so powerful. Or finally, authors sometimes use them to provide external validation for the main character's actions or choices. But it's not just side characters who are used this way. Sometimes authors use main characters to tell another main character's story. And I hate that. If you're in the head of a given character, you're telling their story, not someone else's story. Unless you're intentionally writing a Sherlock and Watson dynamic where the mystery is the point, stay in the head of the person doing the work. Tell their story. Anyway, about the cheerleaders, if they offer a genuine contrast or conflict, such as a character who admires the protagonist but also challenges their methods, then maybe you could make it work. Otherwise, it's better to show the protagonist's impact through their own POV or the reactions of well-developed secondary characters. Now, again, I'm not saying you should never use side character POVs. As I said, I use them myself in epilogues and prologues. However, what you need to bear in mind is that it absolutely takes reader energy to consume these side character POVs. So here are some guidelines to minimize the risk of frustrating your audience. If your audience is like me, granted. 1. Make it count. Every POV should reveal something essential to the plot, theme, or character arcs. If it doesn't, cut it. 2. Keep it brief. One and done POV should be short and punchy. Don't ask the reader to invest 10,000 words in a character you're going to discard. 3. Avoid redundancy. If a flat or cheerleading POV is just repeating information the reader already knows, it's dead weight. 4. Integrate with the main POVs. If possible, weave the information or perspective into the narrative through dialogue, letters, or observations of your main characters, rather than actually introducing narrative characters. Remember, every time you introduce a new point of view character, you're asking the reader to invest their time, attention, and emotional energy. If the payoff isn't worth it, they'll feel cheated, and they might close the book. So, Before you add that extra POV, ask yourself, does this truly serve the story? Or am I just showing off my world building? Alrighty, that's more or less what I wanted to talk about. And now, while the names of the amazing just-in-timers who make this channel financially viable scroll past, let me tell you my thoughts about how to choose the right POV characters. Selecting the right point of view character is all about balancing story needs and reader engagement. Start by asking who has the most stake in the story. Your POV characters should drive the plot forward, embody your central themes, and offer unique perspectives that enrich the narrative. So try to choose them from diverse backgrounds within your world. This is actually a mistake I feel I made early in my writing, and you can check out my walk and talk video on that topic in the information card if you're interested in seeing how the things that I've learned during my writing process. Remember, each new perspective should deepen the story, not dilute it. If a character's point of view doesn't reveal something essential, like a hidden motive or critical event or emotional depth, consider cutting that point of view or weaving their role into an existing point of view character. And always, always, always remember, every point of view character is a promise to the reader that the story is going to deliver emotional depth in that character. Make sure that you make good on those promises. If you made it this far, leave a comment with a number of point of view characters that you like in a story. And don't forget to hype or thumbs up the video, or both if you're feeling very generous. If you're looking for more content from me, check out my video on how to use story circles to plot a character's growth arc. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building.